What up, everyone? This is Scope1, and you are watching the Dialogue with the Frogs, and I'm here with Snappy. Snappy, how are you? What's going on?
Life is beautiful. Life is beautiful. Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Your show, Drawing Down the Stars, I love it. Tarot, all of it. It's very interesting. I don't know anything about it, but it's super cool.
Glad you like it.
Your 6:30 ones are fun. That's a great idea. Be on YouTube before anyone else is, kind of thing. It's a really unique way to do it. You know what I mean?
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you appreciate all that. It's a lot of fun.
So tell us about your background. What is Snappy?
What is Snappy? Okay. I mean, what do I say? Interesting. I guess my journey is basically um oh gosh, that's something I had, it's when you ask people this all the time on my show and stuff, and then you're
Yeah.
put on the hot plate.
Yeah.
But I guess the whole idea behind me is that I like to consider myself an artist in pursuit of beauty, an aesthete, someone who's really into the mystical and the magical and the mythic. As ever since I can remember as a young person, I was always really into fantasy, mythology, religion, spirituality, and understanding this. And I went through a pretty intense journey through a lot of these things, and it's led me basically to being here. But yeah, I consider myself first and foremost a spiritual seeker, and an artist, and one engaging in magic and in the occult, having fun, exploring life in radical belief, ideas, philosophy, and chasing after the muse.
Do you have a favorite muse? I forget how
Oh,
many
God.
there are, but there's a whole list.
Oh, this is such a complicated idea when we're getting into something like this, because there's the 9 classical muses.
Right. 9, that's right.
Right? The 9 Homeric muses. But then you also have the Boeotian muses, the Apollonian muses. You have the 3 Titanide muses. You have the special muses like the 10th muse, Sappho, right? Who is a poet and a very important woman who just rose to transcendence. You also have 9 other lyric poets in the Greek tradition who would parallel the muses. The muses, fundamentally, what you're talking about is this daimonic energy. In the Greek understanding, the universe, well, in most of these different pagan understandings, most of these religions have some idea of life is made up of intermediary spirits, magical beings that populate all life and matter. You yourself are not an individual, right? You are populated by different intermediary beings that allow you to process and do different things. Like, for example, the Romans would call beings that live in your mind the penates. And they or the penis, and they are in the penetralia of the mind. So the muses are some of these energies, these spirits, these daimones. They are daimones of inspiration. They represent that power of the Neneid, which is the magic of the number 9. The completion of the cycle, but also 1 to 9 in the Pythagorean system is the complete set, right? This is when you get to 10. Now you're beginning a new set. So 9 is thing at its completion, everything at its completion, and its most powerful, its most transcendent. So the muses, as that's 9, are like that profound, transcendent beauty. You see what I mean? This is what I'm into. I'm into this kind of nonsense, this kind of exploration.
Well, it's definitely not nonsense. I mean, the first time I heard of the muses was I was reading the book, trying to read it. It's the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and in it he says that he reads the invocation of the muses before he sits down and writes, which is pretty interesting. And I never even heard of that until that. So I kept trying to find like what he. It's like a poem, right? I don't know if you've heard that or not, but
So there's several invocations to the muses, but he's really talking about. So this is a way in which you begin a work.
hmm
So in the Hellenistic tradition, because it's continued in the Roman tradition, you would invoke the muses to come and inspire you. You know,
mm,
there's many different ways in which they're invoked. The one that I immediately think of is, I believe it's Aeneid. This is going to come from the Aeneid. So this is Virgil, the Roman tradition, but it's sing in me, O muse. This, tell me of the songs of Aeneas, right?
gotcha.
And it's like it's this idea that you're invoking that energy, that power directly into you. And there are all kinds of poems and hymns like this. The muses are one of those primal images
hmm
that have become this uniting feature that survives even long after the Greek and Hellenistic tradition, were at its height of relevance. You see it across the Middle Ages, people invoking the muses. You see it throughout the Renaissance, the Romantic era, into the modern times. It's never stopped.
Well,
Right?
Mandy would be mad if I didn't ask you how that ties to satire, his favorite thing in the world.
How it all ties to set. Oh gosh. Well, okay. So satire, we're dealing with something. You're dealing with some really deep, weird, complicated magic from
Yes.
which we are largely divorced. But
Uh-huh.
understand that it's coming out of the festival tradition and
Mhm.
the theatrical rites. And it largely comes out of these shame traditions. So the satire was about getting people to join in the chorus and in the fun. So you'd go and torment them and mock them to get
Mhm.
them to come in. And then
Mm.
it became about defending one's honor and stuff, and it became a way to mock and to expose the things that are shameful. um the satire is really, it deals with this energy too of Saturn, right? Of invoking that energy of Kronos. And
Okay.
Kronos is, you have a duality here. On one hand, he is the Sator, the full one, the one who's eaten his children. He is sated in his cruelty. But on the other hand, he is the one who cuts. He is the great divider of time, time at its infinite point. He famously divides the universe. He separates the sky from the earth and the sea. He castrates Uranus, whose phallus descends to the sea and bursts in foam, and that's how you get the birth of Aphrodite.
I never
You
heard
know,
any of this before.
it's all deep cyclical images and stuff. That's from Hesiod's Theogony.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but yeah, the Greeks are so into all of this kind of wild magical imagery. And the
That's
satire is like steeped in this tradition of cutting, steeped in this tradition of also sating, becoming
mhm.
full, and in mockery, and invoking the cycles and such. How it relates to the muses is the muses bring that inspirational energy. The muses are central to the theater. You have a muse of comedy, Talia,
Mhm.
right? And satire is related to the comedy. Satire was a form of comedic in a way, a form of comedy in a way.
Right.
You know,
That was part of the problem when Mandy was explaining to me satire, and I was like, I thought that's just comedy, and then he just uh, laid it in, and now I just I don't know. To him, everything's satire, so like to a point, right? And
well, this is where it gets hard because there's very specific forms of ancient Greek satire,
mhm,
and things took on, especially as you go through time, things take on these rigid forms, and then forms are lost and forgotten, and then they become mythologized and reimagined.
mhm,
So it's like we're looking at it through such a removed lens, and there's so many different levels of cultural of transformation placed upon it. You
yeah,
know, um, I fundamentally think it's better most of the time to look at it through kind of the lens that Mandy takes, where you're taking at a more generic lens and you're seeing the interconnections. But you
Hmm.
also recognize that it's not going to hand up to scrutiny in any academic sense.
Right.
People are going to get mad at you, and you see that constantly when Mandy's on live streams and whatnot.
And I think that's part of his stick, right? And I
Yeah,
think he like he
absolutely.
he tries to tell me there was a Greek tradition that was basically like battle rap, and
Yeah,
to some
it was.
extent it's very similar to that, where you're trying to piss the other person off so they lose their cool, which is
Oh,
which is
absolutely.
which is part of a tactic in battle rapping, is to try to get the other person to be so, you know, taken off by what you just said that they lose their train of thought, to come back at you, kind of thing. And
Well, think about it. The satire really evolves out of this way of kids shaming each other and mocking each other. You're so dumb. Why aren't you up dancing? And it kind of becomes this battle rap type thing. Eventually, what ends up happening, it evolves fully into the theatrical tradition. Or you see different iterations of these similar ideas in different cultures and
mhm,
such. For example, if you go over to Arabia had this deep battle poetry tradition where different people would write about their gods are so great and my tribe is so great and my fleet of animals are so beautiful, and whoever had the best stuff to say, they would get to hang their poetry over the Kaaba, their sacred little temples, and they would get to put their gods inside the Kaaba, the sacred temple, and so this was like a big fight for it.
hmm,
Later on in the Greek tradition, in the theater, you people want to win the greater Dionysia. You want to win the theater competitions. There are prizes to be won, and everyone's kind of competing. The theater evolves because of this spirit of competition, and everyone's trying to praise trying to bring that inspiration, and the muses are at the heart of all of this,
mhm,
you know and that idea of worship, you know, and catharsis, communal release, because eventually what ends up happening, right, is they recognize how the the evil of shame, the pain of shame, the pain of tragedy,
mhm.
right, the pain of life. How do you confront these aspects of the world? How do you handle them? And the theater and performance and satire and comedy, all of this becomes a way in which you can confront human issues without having to experience them directly. You can go through a communal catharsis. You can witness the tragedy and the shame of another, you know, and then by doing that, you can understand why it's so awful, and you you've taken away some of its power, right, by exploring that image.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. That's that's beautiful. That's exactly right,
That's what it. That's what it's all about. That's the power of fiction in general, right?
Mhm.
Writing, engaging in the awful makes it less awful. Now you can confront it. You know.
That's funny. Yeah, no, s sci-fi is always my way of thinking about how, you know, uh, like the theater and stuff. Like, I was always trying to, like, find those connections, but, um, do you so I don't know how much you've read of the Towel of Minerva, but our muse, well, that's my, um, Mandy's muse is Cerberus. And I
Right.
just wonder how much do you know about Cerberus, and what kind of connections there are between some of what we've been talking about?
Well, Cerberus is a guardian of the threshold. Hecate is a guardian. Really, when you're talking about Cerberus, you're talking about Hecate.
Right.
In Hecate, you're talking about one of the most complicated figures in the entire Greek tradition, one of the oldest figures in the Greek tradition that evolves and changes over time too, and
Mhm.
takes on wild iterations. Okay, so for example, at Eleusis, you have Hecate as a young virgin girl who is the torchbearer, and in the mythology of Demeter, the story is that Hecate hears. She hears the abduction of the Kori, Persephone. And
Mm.
then she goes and tells Demeter and helps her to get her back by also going to Helios, who saw what happened. And so they both come and they help the Great Mother, but she is part and parcel of this. She hears. She gives you the ears to hear,
Ah,
right?
okay. Yeah.
And she acts as a psychopomp. She is the torch bearer who then goes in between. She goes between this underworld and the underworld, helps us to bring that Corey back, right? And so there's this threshold aspect of what is Cerberus. Cerberus is the guardian of the threshold, is the one who stands at the gate. Well, that's really Hecate. Hecate is the she is the Trinodia, I believe is the word. She's the one who's at the crossroads, the Lord of the crossroads. And what they mean by this is the one who stands at the three worlds, the earth, water, and air, you know? And she can go between all of these. And that is her purview as this divine virgin guardian energy. And she is the goddess of magic, also related to the moon. There's so much complicated stuff going on here.
Mm.
But the images of the dogs get wild too, because really the dog have to do with another great goddess is Artemis.
Mhm.
And Hecate and Artemis are often synonymous. Sometimes Hecate is a handmaiden of Artemis. Sometimes Artemis is an aspect of Hecate. Sometimes they're a trinity. Like in the PGM, you often see them Hecate, Artemis, and Selene, who is the Titanic goddess of the moon. But these are intimately interconnected, related images, Artemis and Hecate. Okay?
Mhm.
They're both virginal energies, but Hecate is distinctly like a darker goddess. There's a magic aspect and there's a violent aspect as well,
Yeah.
you know. And with Artemis, she is this kind of huntress, the Amazon, you know. She represents the virgin blossoming, but she also represents the apex predator, humanity at its most, it's at its peak, hunting, taking, natural, that primal raw element. And as such, she is the queen of the wolves and of the dogs. And they talk about her priestesses. Her priestesses are these dogs, right? And often Hecate is a priestess. And she's in Cerberus, Hecate, the priestesses of Artemis, the guardian of the threshold. All of these images are coming around. The three heads of Cerberus, the three heads of Hecate. You
Oh,
know,
okay. Yeah.
it's a deep, deep, deep connected image. And also within the Greek, Hecate was the great monstrous other. She is this terrifying feminine image. So
Yeah.
on another aspect of her, showing you how complex Hecate gets. Those are all the divinity of Hecate. Now we have Hecate as the literal human, right? Hecate was the queen of Colchis, the mother of Medea, and
Uh-huh.
the mother of Circe. Medea and Circe being the most powerful witches in the Greek tradition, you know? And it's said that Hecate is this grand monster. She rules with King Aeetes. And the shores of Colchis, they have this rule. Anyone who lands on the shores will be instantly killed.
Jeez.
And Hecate would do a couple different things. Sometimes she'd impale them on sticks. Sometimes she'd throw them off of cliffs. And sometimes she would do experiments on them. And this is where she developed her medicine, her poisons, her intense magic, her
Mm.
destructive, evil, black magic, you know. And in the story, her daughter Medea, this comes from Diodorus Siculus, if anyone wants to check it out. So in the story, Medea rebels against her parents, rebels against the violence of Hecate and Aeetes. And what she does is she meets Jason. So Jason and the Argonauts land on the shores of Colchis.
Oh,
That's a death sentence, right?
right, right. Yep.
Hecate's gonna come kill you. So Medea runs out and goes, I have to come protect you. You guys, you don't know what you just did. You're gonna die. And Jason says, I'm not leaving until I get that golden fleece. And he had managed to do wild, dark magic. Dark magic. Again, invoking Hecate and invoking Aphrodite. And there's a lot of weird occulted stuff going on. But there's this thing called the jinx. They cast a
Oh.
jinx on her. And the jinx is related to a magical bird called the wryneck. But when we're dealing with birds in the Greek, you're always dealing with virgins and demons, daimones, spirits. There's all this weirdness going on and illusions. But what they say is they take this bird, the wryneck, the jinx, and they strap it to a 12-spoked wheel. And then they spin it and causes it to scream, and it descends into creation, and it's the scream of this jinx that causes Medea to become cursed, and she falls madly in love with Jason, you know. And then Jason says, I want that fleece, I'm not leaving without that fleece. And so Medea says, shit, I guess I gotta help you get the fleece. We get that whole story.
That's
But
crazy.
another part that's interesting here is that Medea becomes the savior. She becomes the hero because what she winds up doing is she transforms the black magic of Hecate into life-saving, transcendent magic, right? She, as a good-hearted soul, inverts the poles. She takes that evil knowledge and uses it for transcendence. And she doesn't use it to kill people, she uses it to save people. But people like Jason and others always see her as connected to Hecate, as connected to this black magic tradition. They don't trust her. She's so evil, you know? Well, she does wild things, but these wild things she does are always at the asking of Jason because she's cursed, you know? So anyway, we don't want to get too down the Medea rabbit.
It just reminds me of Star Wars. I don't know. It's very like,
Well, it's all the same,
yeah,
dude.
it's a giant universe, and it's very interesting. And my
The
brother just threw
comic
me into
books
this shit. You know what I mean?
comic books and fantasy are nothing more than a retelling of myth. And that's why they're so amazing.
Well, even
Right?
some of the names, right? Cersei, they reuse that in Game
Oh,
of
yeah.
Thrones, right? Like she's a queen, right? And she's a terrible queen, right? So
Yep.
it's
There's all these illusions.
well, sometimes I get mad because it's like I thought this was an original idea, and all you did
No.
was take it and rebrand it.
There are no new ideas. One of my favorite quotes of all time comes from Rainer Maria Rilke, and he said that all real art is nothing more than an act of remembrance.
Mm-hmm.
You're just remembering that creative spark that comes from that unitary image. We're all reiterating and telling the same, we're all rhyming with each other. It's
Mm-hmm.
new, but it's not. Star Wars is new, but it's also the hero's journey. And that's
Right.
why everyone loves Star Wars, because it is the hero's journey, you know?
Right.
And it's like people wouldn't have liked it if it wasn't. It's like, of course, the Bible, you read the Bible, it's all humorous, which means that it's all like taking other stories and reinterpreting them through a new cultural lens, because those are the stories that resonate and everyone wants to take them. And we're just constantly retelling the same kind of stories because these are the human ones, and they're important and they're powerful, you know?
Well, I've tried to watch a couple of different plays on Aristophanes, who's at the bottom of our screen, with the
Mm.
the frogs, and I just some of it's so like boring because it's been reused so often that you're like like watching an old movie. You know what I mean? If this makes any sense at all, like watching a black and white movie, it's like, oh, you kind of start to see all these connections that are made to modern ideas, well, modern ideas, but it's really funny. I don't know. It
No, it's amazing. And this is one of the it's also why something like Aristophanes survives the test of time, because it does seem so relatable. It does seem so relevant. The jokes are still funny.
Right.
That's not true of all art, you
Right.
know?
And I think that there's something to that, that that these stories are still good. What, thousands of years later, right? I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know when they date to. I always keep meaning to do that, but
I think it's third century BC. I don't know,
BC,
but
yeah,
long time
a
ago.
long
You'd have to
time.
look it up.
Yeah,
I'm so bad with numbers. That's not my wheelhouse.
yeah, not
Don't
mine
ever
either.
ask me. But like, the thing with that Cerberus and Hecate stuff is this is all about confronting the monstrous other, going to the underworld and being reborn, right? And part
Mhm,
of the Hecate stuff is right. It's this you in the myths are very clear in this. You got to learn to stop striving for your ego and sacrifice the self. Hecate, fundamentally, you'll see many different people become Hecate, and it's
mm,
always people who, well, usually it's always women who sacrifice themselves for others, who
mhm,
give up their life. There's this transcendent power about this. The one of the most important deities is the goddess Hestia. Okay, Hestia is the hearth. This is really wild because, from a religious studies standpoint, most of the Greek deities are humanistic. Okay, they have very human characters. Hestia means the hearth. She is the oven. She is an animistic deity. This goes back because we're talking primordial human stuff now. The fire, right? The spark, the flame that begins all of creation. And in the story, right, it says that she sacrifices her life. She gives up becoming a mother and a wife and living a life to tend to the fire.
mm,
And this is this thing, our creation, everything begins. At least this cycle begins with that. It begins with that sacrifice for the community, that for this spark, you know. Um, and it relates to that primordial communal thing of coming together for warmth and cooking.
mhm. That's that's such a funny connection. The mother hearth. Wow.
Wow, you see all this stuff. It's like it's all interconnected and it all rhymes with each other.
Mhm,
You know, that Hecate image you see all over the place when you start to look at it. You'll see iterations and variations. One of my favorites that's deeply related for those with the ears to hear, as someone like Dr. Ammon would say, would be if you look in the Roman tradition, there's this incredible nymph, and her name, I don't remember her name. Okay, anyway, they call her, at the end of the story, she's called Tacita. So the story goes like this, is that Jupiter wants to rape one of these nymphs, her sister, okay, Juturna, and he's determined that he's going to do it. And Juturna keeps fleeing, and Jupiter confronts all the other nymphs and says, "You better turn her over and make her submit to me. It will be better for everyone. It will be better for everything." Well, Tacita refuses. In fact, Tacita goes behind Jupiter's back and goes to Juno, right, his wife, and tells Juno, "Look, Jupiter's gonna rape my sister, and so punish him, stop this, right?" So what ends up happening though is Jupiter confronts Tacita, and he rips out her tongue and casts her into the marshes, where she becomes a guardian of the threshold, right? And she winds up being taken there by Mercury,
mhm,
is the guardian also of thresholds in magic. They make love and give birth to all of these beings that are called the Lares, the Genii, the Penates, all of the demons, all of the daimonic spirits, right? It
yeah,
comes out of this whole thing. And so you see that's all related to Hecate as well, you know, same kind of psychopomp, same kind of underworld type stuff related with these demonic forces, right? And when you're looking at Cerberus, right, you're looking at this um, confronting the monstrous other from the patriarchal image of Heracles.
Mhm.
So this is also a big thing that you see in the Greek tradition, is as the tradition unfolds over time, the feminine becomes further and further denigrated. You know, Heracles is the manifestation of the absolute masculine. You know, he's that like brutish hero,
Yeah.
the absolute male, and he's dominating that feminine. And so part of the thing is when he comes to the crossroad, right? He doesn't confront the guardian of the crossroad as Hecate. He confronts it as the monstrous other, as Cerberus, the dog, right?
Mm.
Because he's denigrating the feminine and he represents that force. And then he outwits, feeds, he convinces through husbandry to make her submit, you know, like treats her like an animal. So there's a weird implication there with
Yeah.
that image of Cerberus as well.
Have you heard of this book?
What book is that? I can't see.
Uh,
The Periodic Table of Greek Mythology. I have heard of it, but I haven't read it.
well, it's really interesting that the first thing I noticed is that they kind of lay out all of them, all the Greek mythology. There's just all the gods, a lot of people that you've mentioned, and they put Cerberus right next to Hecate, right? Like,
yeah,
it. I'm like, that's not a mistake, or that's not an
no,
accident. Like, that's intentional. It's very
absolutely.
interesting that uh, I still am. I am such a uh, like I don't know enough about this stuff, so it's all brand new to me. Anytime I like pick up and read some of this stuff, but I caught that connection. Like that Hecate is Cerberus. But
Right.
it's kind of deep though. You don't get that right away. They don't mention that in Hercules, like the Disney book or whatever. It's
Well, there's a lot of different ways to approach these kind of traditions. And I think, fundamentally, I like to approach it from the aesthetic perspective as, and there's this whole philosophy that unfolds when you start to engage this, right? So it makes part of the big issue that we have with engaging with religious literature of another culture is that we don't understand the religious perspective and lens through which it's engaged.
Mhm.
It seems like they're just foreign stories and parables. How do we reconcile this? But in the pagan mind, there's nothing that needs to be reconciled. This is all harmonious and beautiful. And what I mean by that is that they're talking about the fundamental central idea that we would call in religion studies, there's not a specific name, but you can use qualified polytheism or qualified monism because it's really neither.
Mhm.
What it is it's this absurdity of recognizing the pole, recognizing that both are true, that there's this paradox. Fundamentally, we're all unified and created. We all come from a singular source. We're all fundamentally one. There is this truth in that understanding. But life continues in separation and duality. All knowledge exists in separation, and we are continuing to evolve in an ever expansive, creative outgrowth, right? Things
Mhm.
continue to grow in complexity and expansion. This is also true. So part of the Greek in the magical image that we see here is you have to be that goddess Aphrodite,
Mhm.
right? And the goddess Aphrodite, she creates the universe to know herself. And the universe is the mirror. And there's this act of witnessing the self through the reflection of the mirror. And the beauty becomes when she sees herself reflected in that mirror and knows herself, understands the beauty, but then she cognizes and recognizes the distinctiveness and the beauty of the mirror itself. And though that mirror is separate and not divine, it is necessary and equally beautiful and part and parcel of the whole experience. It's the one and the many. Both
Mhm.
are true. Neither are true. Life is a joke. Take that leap, And so in the pagan conception, when they're dealing with this kind of stuff, right? All of these goddesses are fundamentally connected. They're all aspects of this great mother that's donning an infinite number of masks, that's constantly diversifying into new forms and iterations, you know? So they're all the same and different. You'll see this, a perfect example if you want to see this on full display. Read the great Roman novel, and you must read the great Roman novel. There's only one. It's The
Okay.
Golden Ass. It's the greatest comedy, in my opinion, just about. And it ends with Lucius, the donkey, being transformed into a man and worshiping the great mother goddesses Isis. But when the great mother reveals herself, she goes, I am Aphrodite. I am Hecate. I am Demeter. I am this. I
Right.
am that. They're all fundamentally, they're all distinct. They're all different. They're all real, but they're all me. Both are true, right?
That's that I mean, that just makes me think of, Shrek, right? The donkeys, like, cast it was a man, right, who was hexed by a witch or something and then became a donkey who can talk. It's like, the retelling of these ideas is so it's all once you have kids, and all I get to watch is fucking kids movies anymore. So then I start, when we're working on these books, I start seeing all these connections to these people in these movies. It's like, whoa, holy shit, the North Wind from Frozen, all this stuff. It's like I thought these were all new ideas, and here I
No,
am like, oh no, it's not new. It's crazy. I
Hecate's the four winds, by the way.
Right, right. I see. I kind of knew that connection, but I couldn't get to it. I can't just. I don't know how you do it. You just your
You
recall
got to
is
be a
just
nerd
like.
of epic proportions, my friend.
I guess I could fucking do that with music. I could just go all day and tell you, who was
That's the
influenced by
thing.
what and who's, what's this, and I guess that's what
That's you know,
Mandy says. I'm Apollonian. That's how I work. Is
it's all about what inspires you. Here's the thing, right? What you should do is go to the things that you love and
yeah,
apply this kind of magical lens, and you will see that all the things you love are saying the same stuff. The world is constantly rhyming with itself. You don't need to go to myth to find this. I
right,
mean, I like myth. That's where I find myself. But you can find it like, okay, I'm also a musician. One
right.
of the wild things you can see is that some artists, they just tap into the muse, they tap into this magic, they start doing it, and they don't even effing know what they're doing.
Those,
Some magicians fully get it and embrace it.
yeah,
Two perfect examples of this would be Prince and David Bowie.
okay, love them
Prince is
both.
someone who fully embodied it. He becomes the literal divine androgyne. He's walking around in purple, singing sex songs,
Yeah,
creating the most complicated kind. As a music nerd, it's just mind blowing. His band and the music they were doing.
yeah.
But he also rebels against it, becomes a Jehovah's Witness, and he has a whole break with this whole understanding. You know,
Mm,
but it's very clear this is someone who is deeply, deeply connected to that magic of inspiration and
yeah.
deeply connected to these, even though he wasn't. Why is he becoming the purple androgyne? You know what that means. Don't you, Scobie, or am I talking way over your head?
Yeah, you're over my head, but I kind of get it, but not really. I mean,
So in the Greek tradition and in the magical tradition, okay, there's this whole thing about reforming the cosmic androgyne.
okay.
Okay, so at the beginning of creation, you have to imagine there was a singular being, right, that was born out of the cosmic womb. And this being was made up of all matter. And what ends up happening is, in desperation and frustration, it rips itself apart in order to know itself. I was talking about Aphrodite in the mirror. This is a similar kind of creation story. This comes from the Orphics explicitly. And they
Hmm.
have this character of Ion Phani's Thesis, who is this cosmic being who then rips himself apart and descends into creation and becomes the many. So there's this whole thing. That which is above is the same as that which is below. The alchemical process is this idea of the alchemical wedding. It's recreating the
Okay.
whole. It's balancing the poles. So the magical process is about recreating the divine androgyne at the center of creation. And this divine energyne represents everything united into a whole. And that is represented by the color, the royal purple. So at the heart of these Greek and alchemical magical traditions is a purple androgyne. And the whole point of magic is to recreate this image, to become that person that's completely balanced between their unconscious and conscious self, their masculine and their feminine, their animal and their man, you know, someone who's united in form, basically embodied the whole in the individual. It's becoming deity, right? And
Mm.
so when you can embody that, that means that you've hit that creative spark. You have become enthused with the power of the universe. You have ascended the throne of Jupiter, of Zeus. So I look at someone like Prince, you're the bloody purple androgyne. My God, you're doing magical work, my friend. What's going on here? And he has no reference to that.
I was just gonna say, from what you're saying, he just liked purple, and it just happened to be, a connection to this idea, and he had no idea about it, which is really funny.
What it is these stuff is human. It would come, I'm telling you about it from the Greek tradition, but you can see it in just about every tradition. There's so
Right.
many iterations of this idea. We understand, because here's the thing, we are the body. You, in a dualistic universe where we understand everything through this cognition and perception, we relate everything to the self, to our individual body. So it is the most human thing to understand the universe in the similar conception, to see everything as iterations of bodies up and down. And so just to imagine it in such a way is just it's human and it's natural. And it's about recognizing we're all so more similar than we are different. Male and female is largely an abstract. It's a
Hmm.
creative thing in the moment. It's not something that is true of the human nature. Human nature is beyond such limitations. And in our genes, in your cells, you contain the totality of human nature going back to that infinite primordial, you
It's
know?
it's fascinating, and I never cared about any of that shit until I had kids, and then I start thinking about my family history, and you can kind of see the DNA and where all the where your family lineage came from, and it all ties back to the same thing. It's so fascinating,
Well,
and
it's such a wild thing, right?
it is, it is,
Like I
and
always
the
think that. Sorry, go ahead.
no, go. I was just gonna talk about the more he throws me into this Greek shit, he likes to challenge me, which is fun, the brother dichotomy thing. And he told me one night that the music theory is made up and it's not real. And then I found right to fuck with me because like that's how you because as you were saying, like when you meet some musicians who they can just play and they don't even know what they're playing. um I have a friend who does that. He doesn't even know what notes he's playing. He just can play, and it's amazing. And I try to work with him on a song, and I'm like, I need to know what key you're in. I need to know what scale you're in. And he's like, I have no idea. And then you find out that these scales and their names are Greek, right? The Dionian and all the names of the scales. We still use them thousands of years later. It's
Yeah.
fascinating to me.
The same Western musical theory is the bedrock, right? We're still building upon that same bedrock of understanding, right? Orpheus, the great prophet and magician of the Greek tradition, played a lyre. We still have similar stringed instruments, you
Yeah.
know, and the drum is this primordial Dionysian instrument. All of this is so human.
The
And
drum,
what I mean though, like, as a musician, you've got to understand too, like, you can understand these magical concepts of remembrance and possession. Because what I mean by this is like when someone is truly in the pocket, in the moment,
mhm.
it's like your body is just going into muscle memory. You're just performing. You're not even thinking about it,
Yeah.
right? It's become something that you're just able to do. You're literally just remembering what you spent hundreds of hours working towards. But in that moment, you're in the zone, and that's when things. It's like you're possessed.
Yeah.
Your body's just taking over. You know. music is so about that. For me, like, I'm a percussionist, and what I always want to do is I want to get so deep into like, usually I'll pick a time signature or a couple time signatures,
Hmm.
and in a tempo that'll sort out of my head, and then you just keep playing it over and over and over again, and then it's fill in the gaps, and then you enter into these trance experiences,
Yeah.
and
It's funny
you
that you call it a trance because it feels like a trance sometimes. I mean,
absolutely,
I've performed and done a set, and you kinda snap out of it like, "Oh, it's over," and, like, you just get in this rhythm, man, and it's some people
you're
can just
totally
turn it
enthused.
on and or they're always on, I've met those people where they're always ready to perform. I always had to work up to it. It was always a building process, and I always had anxiety beforehand and concerns and worries, but some people just go, and it's incredible. I always wish I could do it. I can't I can't do it, you
Takes a
know?
lot of training to get to there. You know, the reality is most musicians, aren't playing enough with people. They don't have enough. You got a life.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
to get that kind of skill, these people, a lot of people are just playing constantly,
Yeah.
or they're in the zone constantly. Some people it's natural, but that's a very, very rare thing. I find most people it's born of actual like performance. It comes from like really, 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 really engaging. Eventually, it becomes that second nature. But that second nature, it's like you don't just get there. It has to be earned. You
Mhm.
know.
What you said there was a connection between Dionysian and the drum? I never heard that before.
Oh yeah, Dionysus. Okay. The Maenads, they beat the drums
Uh-huh.
in order to bring Dionysus. The satyrs beat the drums in order to bring Dionysus. Dionysus is deeply related to this image of the donkey, right? The donkey. So when you're talking about the Dionysian magical tradition, there's one phrase that I want you always to keep in mind, because this is the central image. Bacchus in adoration of Venus. The
Okay.
Dionysus chases Aphrodite. He loves Aphrodite, but there's this eros of distance. Aphrodite is in the stars, Dionysus is bound in the earth. To bring those poles together is a near impossibility. Dionysus is the absolute low, she's the absolute high. And so you'll see this invocation of the poles. The donkey often becomes the one that bears the great mother.
Hmm.
So the golden ass, the story I told you, the ass is the one that carries the great mother on his back, right?
Mm.
Um, how does this relate to the drum? The donkey is cursed, right? Think about this. The donkey is the lowest of the low, and it is the beast of burden. It is forced to carry. But get this, in the donkeys that were used for carrying the statue of Sibylle when they died, their skin was taken and was turned into a drum. And
Yeah,
they were
okay.
beaten in death. They didn't
That's
even get respite in death.
that's such a sad idea.
Right? But no, 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 no. We're talking about a tradition that invokes polar magic.
Right, right. Yeah, I just
Okay. So that image of the drum, the skin of the donkey beaten in death to invoke the heartbeat of the mother, that becomes the most transcendent image. That
alright.
donkey has sacrificed itself or out of love and adoration. It is the most high. And it is that element of the drum beat that brings the love. It makes the heart manifest.
Right.
And it is through going through that term, by going into the earth, by suffering, by being the beast of burden, Dionysus gets to connect to Venus, right? The trick is to go down, right? The illusion is to try and go the other way,
Mhm.
right? What we see often is, I mean, you can see you see both magical paths. This is the difference between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Okay, the Dionysian path is that path of Dionysus, that is the beast of burden, beaten in life and in death, who goes through the cycles of generation and transformation, ever striving and ever denied.
Mhm.
Okay, what is the path of Apollo and Attis? The path of the stars. This is that story really, really well told by the myth of Attis and Cybele. So these are Phrygian gods, but they were adopted into the Greek and Roman pantheon and are kind of very deeply intrinsically related. And even Dionysus has Phrygian roots. So the story with Attis is the child of Cybele. Cybele is the queen of the stars, the great queen of the stars. And it begins with them in this loving perfection in the stars. But Attis grows bored.
Hmm.
Attis grows bored with that perfection in the stars. And so he looks down and he sees the beautiful nymphs in the water of the earth.
Okay.
So he descends from the stars into the water and he engages with the beauty of the nymphs. And he keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper until he finally winds up in the mud. And then he finds himself stuck and bound in the mud, engaged in frivolous debauchery, engaged in the absolute generation. And he finds himself at the lowest of the low, completely disconnected from his love, completely disconnected from the mother. And in that moment, he recognizes that he has utterly lost himself. And so he cries out in desperation, "Come and save me." So that great mother Cybele sends her magical beast, the Theriac, the dragon. And this beast comes into the waters, into the mud. It causes Attis to go crazy. And Attis castrates himself, rejects that lust that had bound him to the earth, that love of the nymphs, castrates himself and goes through a little transformation where he's going to do divine imitation. He utterly rejects the self and the earth and entirely embraces the perfection of the mother and strives for the stars. He rises above the earth on the back of the beast, right? And he sends the stars. Now, the beast this is a very specific word that is used. The Theriac is a drug.
Mm-hmm.
The drug that induces madness. It's a drug that causes him to ascend to the stars and to leave the earth behind. But what we see, though, is there's a difference. In the Dionysian, it's the knowledge of the self going into the earth that leads one to the stars. And the Apollonian, it's the rejection of the self, the transformation into the deity that leads one. So
Gnarly.
it's that pursuit of perfection versus that pursuit of embracing the cycles of transformation. Fundamentally different, but intrinsically connected. Does that make any sense?
But actually, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm more confused about what I maybe Mandy likes to use. I always thought he used Apollonian as like an offensive thing towards me, like
Well,
being a
he doesn't
jerk.
let
Well,
he
which is in his way, or that's how he would do things. But
he's taking it from a Nietzschean perspective. So
right,
Nietzsche, sorry, he did not like Apollo. So okay, well, but he also these are primordial forces of the universe, right? Neither pole is meant to be absolutely embraced, but there's a different kind of qualities about them.
yeah,
Okay, so the essence of Dionysus is liberation. It seeks that expansion and it seeks that constant growth. The essence of the Apollonian is refinement and the production of the beautiful. Okay, both of these energies are willing to do whatever it takes to manifest their energy. You know, they, you know, they are that embodied energy. Dionysus is liberation. It just knocks everything the F down. It doesn't care. It's
right,
always in pursuit of generation and transformation. Life will go on, right? There's no building to anything. We just are moving forward. Okay. Now, Apollo is that energy of constantly striving for refinement, constantly striving to create the beautiful, to make manifest that which is desirable, to build, to build, to build. This energy has a tendency, right? So that Dionysian, what ends up happening is things are born in Dionysian liberation and wildness, youthfulness. Things have a raucous energy, destructive force, new ideas come in. But then as time goes on, things tend to evolve into an Apollonian form. They seek refinement, they seek beauty. But what ends up happening is that pursuit of the beautiful and that pursuit of refinement leads to decadence.
Mhm.
And Apollo, or sorry, Nietzsche didn't make a distinction. He said that Apollonian tendency leads to decadence, right? And then it ends the cycle. I like to break it up. I say that Apollonian turns into Saturn,
Mhm.
so that Apollonian is the strive for beautiful. And it is fundamentally that strive towards complexity that eventually leads to decadence. But I don't necessarily see that strive as the problem in and of itself. I see it's that turn to decadence that is the problem,
Mhm.
and it is this, what ends up happening is that there becomes a calcification, there becomes an empowerment. The more beauty, the more wealth, the more removed from the earth in the generation of cycles, the more these forms resist change, the more they refuse to give up, the more they try to stop time, they consume their children. They want to maintain a status quo and they want to stay, right? And then it becomes calcified and ugly and it dies. And this you'll see this. You can apply this kind of magical framework to just about any idea, any meme, any person, any cultural thing.
And
It just plays
Saturn
out.
is Saturn's tied to Kronos too, right?
Kronos and Saturn are the same.
Okay, yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah. That
It's
book may split it up between the Orphic Kronos
okay.
and the agricultural Kronos, but they're the same.
I haven't really read it. I've just flipped it open and kinda did some blibblemancy, kinda just, "Let's see what comes out of the book and read about it real quick and put it down," and but Mandy just he'll go off and off and off about some of this stuff sometimes.
So the story of Saturn is like, you should really take, or Kronos, really go into it. It's one of the primordial ones.
Yeah.
So I told you part of the story. So where we left off was Kronos had castrated Uranos, his
Uh-huh.
father,
Right.
and separated the universe, divided time, gave birth to Aphrodite, to creation. Okay. This whole thing, he ushers in a golden age, gives birth to bounty and to beauty, and people are living in this incredible affluence. There isn't that strive for patriarchal growth, but there is this incredible um, abundance and equality. The Saturnian time has this equality. It's really
Mhm.
representative of sort of the the era before agriculture, pre-agricultural time.
Right.
The earliest forms of human civilization. So while we didn't have complexity, we did have incredible abundance of leisure, incredible abundance of food, and incredible abundance of equality. And all of that kind of changed. We lost the equality, we lost that abundance, we gained a lot. And don't get me wrong, there was much horror in the
Oh, yeah, right.
Chronos golden age, but there was this innocence and equality and connection to the earth that is lost, right? But what ends up happening is Kronos, you know, he institutes this golden age and he rules over the earth, and he doesn't want to give up time. He doesn't want to give up the throne. There's a prophecy that says that his children are going to overthrow him. So what he does is anytime his wife Rhea has a child, he eats them.
Mm.
So he eats all of his children, except what ends up happening is his wife Rhea conspires and they hide Zeus. They smuggle Zeus away, and they take Zeus to the sky where he gets trained by this goat mother, and he learns the magic of lightning. And then Zeus confronts Kronos and slays him and frees all of his siblings. And then that tyrant is put down into the dark underworld.
It's incredible. I like I said, all I get to watch is kid movies, so it kinda reminds me of, the latest one. It's about a star, and then the little star dances around, and, it's, this great king who, I'm an asshole not knowing what the name of the movie is, but the great king, he's ruled with power, and he takes everyone's dreams and their all their dreams, and he puts it in this magical power. Anyways, he eventually is taken down by this one little star, and it reminds me of this idea. It's just these retellings of these stories, and
Absolutely.
it's called Wish. That's what it's called.
These
It's
are these are
newer, but
Yeah, that sounds awesome. But these are primordial ideas, human ideas, right? We all see those people who resist death and transformation and want to, out of that sense of ego, they want to dominate the next generation. They want to hold on to any semblance of power that they have, right? And they become evil and cancerous and disgusting,
well, it
you know?
reminds me of Atlantis too, though. Isn't that part of the
Mhm.
mythology in Atlantis? Is they're so decadent, and then they eventually,
Yeah,
right, the gods take them down,
exactly.
or whatever you want to call it.
Exactly. This cycle of decadence is deeply understood. One interesting thing is there's this really famous Islamic historian, sometimes considered the birth, like the innovator of history, named Ibn Khaldun. And Ibn Khaldun, he came up with this idea of decadence. He's basically said you could see this. What would happen is you see this cycle of history where the cities are vulnerable. Before modern technology, the real power existed in the tribes.
Hmm.
Horse warfare, you could just sack any city. You could surround a city, and eventually every city is going to fall. But all of the wealth and the affluence and the desired cultural goods exist in the city. So you see this cycle where what happens is you get this Dionysian frenzy, this prophetic inspiration that resists that decadence. It says that that city that is decadent and ugly, we have to overthrow the rulers. So that tribal warfare comes into the city, it sacks the old ruler, puts a new ruler on, and things are good for a time until a couple generations pass, and then that new family has become decadent and the city has become decadent again, and then the cycle repeats. A
Hmm.
power from outside, that tribal energy gets riled up into a frenzy, and it smashes that decadent king, and again and again and again.
It reminds me of the Fourth Turning. Have you read that at all?
I have not.
It's basically just saying how, like, different generations kind of go through this cycle, and how we're in the fourth turning currently, where it's all about to start all over again, and they kind of use the latest generations with, like, the silent generation and the great generation, and Gen X and Gen Z, and it kind of moves through that and how they relate to this cycle. It's very interesting stuff. I
When you get into this, you can see a lot of parallels with our modern times, and there's
Yeah.
just so many. So one of the Diogenes, one of Mandy's favorites,
Yes.
one of his big criticisms, he goes, it's the Greek love of sweets that's going to lead to their decadence and their destruction. And what we see time and time again is that it's that love of affluence that leads to colonialism, that leads to the production of all these goods, that leads to this lack of empathy and destruction of nature and the other, right? This dehumanization can only exist within that extraordinary decadence. And that decadence continues to justify itself until it becomes totally removed from the earth and then has to be put down. And we're seeing this on full display, and it's mind numbing because we are in the decadent culture.
Right.
And so we are part in it's we are so privileged that it's hard for us to even see what's happening.
Yes. It's
But and so many people in our culture can't. They can't even notice. But it's also by design. Our entire society and our entire world has been built on the backs of everyone else.
Mhm.
And now we're having this mask off moment where, the powers that be are just saying, this is who we are, and we're going to take everything. Well, when that happens, there's almost always a backlash. You know, Again, like, I'm a magician, I'm into magic, I'm into ideas like this. If you invoke an image upon yourself, you become that image.
Right.
Elon Musk went at CPAC and he said, I am become meme, and made a Nazi salute. You know what happens at the end of that Nazi meme, the fascist meme? Mussolini was ripped apart. His body was desecrated and pissed on. Hitler died a coward in a bunker, shot dead. Their country stricken them from the record, just about.
Yeah.
Like that's where that meme goes. That's what you want to invoke upon yourself.
Yeah, I don't know anything about memes. Internet culture is just not. I am not in it. I don't know anything about it. I like stoicism, and that's about it. The
Right.
four. It because your cycle reminds me of the four, whatever they call these things. There's courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. Right? Like you got to have all of them, and you can't lean on one too much. And it reminds me of this
Exactly.
stuff.
It's all interconnected. You'll see so much of this, right? If you go into the Tao, Chinese Tao, you'll see a
Yeah.
lot of this stuff too, right? You get this image. Why is it in all these cultures too that it's the infinity, the eight, that is such a magical thing? Because you get the bicycle. This is a mathematical idea. If you're in a system that exists in time and you need to be in a constant state of adaptation in order to maintain equilibrium,
Mhm.
then your most balanced and successful form will be the infinity, because this will allow you to
Mm.
maintain balance and to move through life, to basically be in that immortality state. And all of
Oh,
the ancients recognize this. They recognize the cycles, they recognize the churning, and that the purpose was this continual generation, and that you had to find that middle path of balance,
well,
you
isn't
know?
it interesting that the speed of light is 186,000 miles an hour? That's
Right?
which I got to do a little play on making Venus a pizza oven in the latest book.
That's
So, and it's called 186 slices per second. Where they
amazing.
cook they cook it was inspired by Neil deGrasse Tyson, actually, where he talked about being out nerded by somebody in a live stream, which is, I love live streams now. It's so nice that you can actually meet really cool people in them. But anyways, in
Right.
one of his live streams, somebody asked him how long it would take to cook a pizza on Venus, and he said 7 seconds. And then somebody in the comments was like, "Oh no, did you consider these different variables?" And he said, "Oh, you're right. It would take 2.5 seconds to cook a pizza on Venus." So this inspired me to write a sci-fi about a pizza shop on Venus that delivers pizza throughout the universe, or I mean, throughout the solar system. I tried to keep it local. I didn't want to go too crazy with it, but yeah, I don't
That's
know. It's
hilarious.
yeah, it's just funny that they're connected. Do you think, because you brought up the Taoists, do you think yin and yang are related to this too?
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Because once he
Absolutely.
started talking about that, I was like, well, is that like yin and yang? And it's funny how all of these cultures are very, very related. Not
We're
related,
more
but
similar than different. We're
yeah,
more
yeah.
similar than
That's
different,
and that's where you kind of started. It's very, I don't know. I think the more that we embrace these ideas, maybe people will start to come around to them, that we are more alike than we are different.
That's the thing. All of our like, and people get upset. Oh, but my culture is distinct and beautiful and magical. I'm like, yes,
It is.
100% yes. But it's what I've been saying. It's the one and the many. Both are
Right,
true.
right.
Both are true. You guys came up with this entirely uniquely and magically on your own, and it also rhymes with everyone else's who
Yes.
also came up with it beautifully and uniquely on their own. And
Yeah.
that is the grand mystery of the universe. We're all going like, what is going on here? Because we're all wrestling with the same problems, and we're all human beings. So of
Yeah.
course we're going to have similarities, but also of course they're going to be radically different too.
Mhm.
You know, but what we need to do is come together, because it's in the magic. When we come to get the real magic always occurs in that interplay of the different cultures. And in
Right.
the, like one of the texts that I love that is so mind-blowing and wild is the Greek magical papyri, the
Mhm.
PGN. Okay. And this text, when you read it, it's shocking. There are Christian images, there are Jewish images, Egyptian images, Greek images, right? And so you'll have a guy who identifies himself as, there's this magic spell. I identify myself as Moses in order to summon the headless God, commander of the demons.
Jeez.
And and then you're saying these Pelasgian words and using Egyptian hieroglyphs, but this is where the art and interesting stuff comes together. It's when we start to see the synchronicities and the realizations.
Mm.
We're all so similar but different.
Yeah.
But this,
but it's such a simple idea that it's hard it's so hard to like, I don't know, once you embrace it, that it's hard to explain it. You know what I mean? At least to me it is. It's like, of course, this is happening. I don't know. It's so strange. And I like I always say, I have no idea what I was getting myself into, because he tricked me into. Did I ever tell you how he tricked me into this world?
No, how did he trick you
So,
into it?
so this will be fun because I like stoicism. So, it's the closest thing to me that's, I don't want to say a religion, but I've got the coins
Guiding
over here.
principle.
Yeah, yeah. I've got the coins over here. I've got books written on it. And anyways, he basically told me one day about the Cynics, right? And how stoicism came from the Cynics. So I was like, wait a minute, you had me at hello, tell me more. If this came from these people, I want to know, where these ideas came from. And it's funny to tie it back to the purple, is in Meditations, Marcus Aurelius talks about how the purple is made from the shell. He said it was ground up from the shell to make the purple dye, and it's very and once Mandy started making all this shit purple, I was like, wait a minute, is this related to this? And he goes, oh yeah, how'd you not know? It's just really funny that, I the way that he sees this stuff is so different than I do. But
It's wild, but the connections are still there, and you're seeing them in your own life, and you're starting to
yeah,
recognize them, right? You see them in
yeah,
the children's literature, you see them in Stoicism.
yeah.
It's all kinds of interesting, right? Marcus Aurelius is an interesting guy, right? And he was wrecked on opium like 24/7.
That's what I heard somebody say that. I think it was Amen, right? I think he said he was a dope
Yeah.
head, and I was
Well,
like,
most of the emperors were. You
yeah,
had all this money and you had all that access, and people were in constant chronic pain a lot of the time back then.
right,
So
yeah. I as soon as he said it, I was like, well, yeah, that kind of makes a lot of sense, but
it's just wild to think about, though.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just wild to. I can't believe how much of this culture there is. It just, the more you get into it, the more there is. It almost never stops.
It never stops. You barely can scratch the surface, right?
Well, even in Aristophanes, the frogs, right? I forget what his name is, but he's there with the main character. Is it Hercules? Or no, it's Diogenes is pretending to be Hercules, right? Is that the story?
Dionysus, yeah.
Dionysus,
He
sorry. I
pretends
always
to
I
be
always get those
Hercules. And then there's his buddy is the slave there. I'm trying to remember
right.
what his name is.
Well, there's one video of it where, like, he's they filmed the play, and
Mhm.
he's like sitting on the edge of the stage, and he's like talking to the crowd, and he's like kind of mocking them in a way, and it's like breaking that fourth wall with like Deadpool, right? Deadpool was the first comic book character to talk to the audience, right, instead of just tell the story. And seeing that connection go all the way back to 2500 years ago is just crazy. And I was watching it
Yeah.
with Mandy, and because Mandy is not into comic books or any of that shit. And I was like, yo, dude, do you know what this reminds me of? He's like, no, what the fuck are you talking about? I was like, look, this is kind of like Deadpool. He's talking to the crowd. He's like pointing at them and like kind of messing with them in a way, and it's so funny that that idea came from that idea, and
Well, it's also, there's so much wildness in all of these things, and there's so much interconnections. Okay, you're talking about Aristophanes, and I got to bring up. Okay, so Frogs is a magical book about how to descend into the underworld and how to do necromancy and
yeah,
come back with new ideas. Right?
right.
He goes back to find the greatest playwright, and he has that big debate: who is it? Who's better? Is it God? What were the two playwrights' names? Now I'm too tired. But anyway,
Yeah,
but the point is that it's telling you how you can engage this imagery of to resurrect the giants of the past to inform your present. That's what the magic is really about. How to enter the underworld, how to don the costume and fool the people in the underworld, how to do these magical rites to confront the dead and to summon them back.
it's
Really
amazing.
wild stuff.
It is wild, but it.
But go ahead, Craig.
No, I was just gonna say, do you have any closing ideas? I don't want to
Oh,
steal too much of your time. We could go on for hours, but I.
I just was going to point out one of the things I wanted to talk about with Aristophanes is that You have you read Birds?
No, so that was next on my list to try to get into was birds.
You gotta read Birds. So
Yeah.
Birds is, I may like it even more than Frogs now. So it blew my mind because I recognized that the Bible is ripping off Birds with the
Mm,
story of Solomon.
okay.
Solomon is doing the same thing that Pestiteris does, the main character, and that means the trusty friend. But the
Mhm.
story of Birds is that these men in Athens get sick and tired of the rules and the laws in Athens and the rules and the laws of the gods. And they're going to go seek out this bird called the hoopoe,
Oh.
right? And they're going to learn how to talk to the other birds. And they're going to use the magic of the birds to make their own temple in the sky. And they're going to convince all the people to worship them. And they're going to steal the magic from the gods and replace them.
Mm.
And it's through this act of constructing a temple and using this magic of the birds to convince all these people to support you. And eventually, he even like, I got to tell you this. This is one of the wild parts is they start succeeding. They build the temple in the air. They start succeeding. They start getting all the people to worship them. And so the gods are suffering. They no longer have their ambrosia. They can't get their power anymore. Right.
Oh.
So, and the gods keep trying to send people to infiltrate. So what ends up happening is Prometheus sneaks his way in. He hides himself under an umbrella and he runs into the Temple of Birds and he goes to the trusty friend and he's like, "Look, your magic is working. It's causing Zeus to to suffer. But here's the thing: the only way you can truly win is if you get the virgin. You
Mm.
need to have Basileia. You need to have Hera on your side. Whoever has Hera in their temple will win." And so what he winds up doing is he outwits Zeus. Sends these guys to come mess with him. He sends this like monster, Heracles and Poseidon. And so what he winds up doing is he immediately outwits the the demon. And then I'm trying anyway, he winds up outwitting everyone. And
Yeah.
he convinces Heracles to join him. And they go back to Zeus and they confront Zeus and they tell him, "We're only going to give you ambrosia if you turn Hera over to us and you allow me to marry Hera." And the play ends with the good friend marrying Hera, becoming the new Zeus, becoming the new power on the throne, totally supplanting, you know? But you got to understand, these are magical texts. These are telling you how to create works of art that will flip the poles, how to engage in the battle of myths, how to change the world through literature.
It's
That's what
crazy.
these guys are doing, you know?
Well, I think they knew the power of literature back then, right? You know, that's
Well, it wasn't literature back then, it was
well,
theater, but you know what
theater,
I mean?
right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Theater, right.
Story. They knew the power of story, right? It's all about, it's not about really what, truth doesn't matter. It's the stories we tell. It's the stories we tell. And this is the thing that I'm interested in. I'm interested in these artists who had the audacity to try and shape history, you know, and they do so through myth, and often it's the ancients, but you even see it in modern times. Like
Oh yeah.
when I was studying this stuff, or not super modern, but you can find some super modern people. I just want to end with one cool thing that people should look at.
Absolutely.
So when I was looking at that image of birds, it was because I was doing a show for my channel where we were diving into Solomonic magic. And I wanted to find the roots of Solomonic magic. And then I went, wait, Solomon is doing what the birds are doing. And I'm like, well, who else is doing this type of stuff? And
Mm.
then I found there's this, one of the first feminists of all time is this female writer from the early Renaissance named Christine de Pizan. And she writes this incredible book called The Book of the City of Ladies,
Okay.
which is very similar kind of magical hypersigil. It rewrites history and it tries to uplift women. It tries to create a magical ideal temple that brings people together to change reality and to flip the poles. And it's like, this is a constant theme. You see all kinds of people playing in this realm and trying to change history through these magic rites, and it begins with these plays, you know with these communal sharing of story. Magicians are just storytellers and
Right.
artists.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
it.
I think they even the modern magicians would tell you that, they're
Absolutely.
Penn and Teller, those guys.
Well, for me, if you're going to look for modern magicians, you got to look to people like who would be a really good one? Oh my gosh, it would be like Alan Moore.
Never heard of them.
Alan Moore, you never heard of him? He's one of the biggest comic book writers of all time. He wrote V for Vendetta. He
Oh,
wrote The
okay.
Watchmen. He
Okay.
wrote so V for Vendetta is clearly a magical hyper sigil. So this is a wild thing. Alan Moore wrote that book to inspire people to anarchy, to inspire people to do decisive actions to resist the oncoming technological enslavement that we're
Mhm.
witnessing. And what happens years after he writes that comic, a bunch of nerds create an anarchist organization using his mask as the
Yep.
fundamental symbol.
I know.
Anonymous. Art gave birth to reality, you
Yeah.
know?
Isn't that crazy that that came from that? Ah,
And Alan Moore is a magician and he told you that's what he was doing.
yeah.
This is the
Well,
thing.
Snappy, my head is full.
Yeah,
You
sorry.
no, no, I just had no idea how. I mean, I've heard you go, but I never. Your recall is incredible, and
I, I,
well,
I, I'm too much of a nerd. I know I overtalk, but
no, no, I
we'll have to
appreciate.
talk more
No,
and
no, I
here's the
appreciate
next.
it. Well, I think we could do this again sometime. Absolutely. Once I find more ideas to pick your brain about on, I kind of want it because I don't really know what I'm doing with this show. I wanted to learn about these ideas from different people and hear different perspectives than just from Mandy. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because you explain things differently, and I learn differently from what you're saying than what he says, and it's this has been fascinating though. Do you have anything coming up, or did you want to promote anything or talk about anything? I
Yeah,
got.
I mean, everyone should come check out my channel,
They
Drawing Down the
should.
Stars. I do
Absolutely.
regular daily tarot episodes, which is amazing. And then my friend Dion and I, we try to every week or 2 weeks, we do a show called Occult Explorers, where we explore various weird mysteries and ideas and just have fun. And it's nothing too serious. We do try to keep, we do have somewhat of an academic approach where we're trying to be, but the show is really about exploring ideas. We're not trying to tell you whether or not something is true. We're saying, look at this idea that people believe. Isn't that wild? Isn't this crazy and
It's,
fun?
it's right up my alley. I'm the same way. I'm not trying to. I just want to learn it and just create. Because once you learn a
Exactly.
story, like I said with the pizza thing, I get inspired, and then I write something else or a piece of music. So
It's all stories. It's all about, yeah, it's all about story and just having fun, exploring the mysteries. Right.
well, thank you, Snappy. This has been a blast.
Loved it. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to coming back again. And I hope to write more stuff for the next volumes of the Towel of
Absolutely.
Minerva.
Anytime. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right, everyone. Say thank you to Snappy.
Peace.